Hi everybody, it's Adrian Plass here again.
Yes, and Bridget again.
Not an easy day to start today
No.
because I suppose, like a lot of people, we were hoping that the numbers of people who were dying from this terrible disease would hopefully go down. That doesn't make it any easier for those who've suffered and have suffered with them. But it is disappointing that the numbers are still rising as they are.
Yeah, and we're starting another week. Still very uncertain, still pretty frightened, I think. Well, I don't know about you, but I certainly am. I'm hanging on to something. You know, we're told to rejoice with those who rejoice as well as to mourn with those who mourn. And we heard something just this morning about somebody who has had this horrible virus but is recovering. And I'm sure there are lots of people in the country who don't really want to say, well, actually, they're really excited about anything at the moment because of all those who are suffering. And I think it brought me back to something that we talked about just recently, of saying that let's just get on with laughter and love. That's what we can do. And we're helped by some of the things that you're sending us. And one is, we asked you to tell us what drink you thought you were. Well, we've had some interesting responses to that. Somebody says they think they're strong cider. This is a farmer we know rather well. Strong cider because you can drink quite a lot before it makes you go silly. And then we heard from someone else a slightly more complex drink. Strong coffee with honey, cream and a bit of Baileys. Because sometimes this person reckons they come on a little bit strong, but then they're laced with honey, a sort of busy bees, cream skimmed from the top of this person's head, and a touch of Baileys, which makes people wonder what crazy flavour her personality is. And somebody else who just said they think they're tea. And you know what? I think that's what I am, or certainly I'd like to be. I like the idea of being tea, something kind of, sort of familiar and I don't know, maybe comforting, maybe nice.
I haven't thought what you are myself. We were talking yesterday about cricket.
Oh yes, in heaven.
And heaven, and we had an email from someone who made a comment about Jeffrey Boycott, who some of you will know perfectly well who that is, and others will not. And the comment he made was that a boycott innings at cricket is a glimpse of eternity. Now, for those who are wondering what on earth that means, Jeff Boycott famously took a very long time to score his runs because he was determined to make a century every single time, and he made loads of them, but he took a jolly long time doing it. So that was the reason for that. And we were talking about heaven yesterday and about my mum and how she'll enjoy it when she's she's there. She must be enjoying being out of her wheelchair and zooming around, doing whatever she wants to do up there.
Well, you said she'd be bouncing like calves or cows let out into a field after the winter.
That's right, yeah. Boinging around.
Boinging around, yes.
And that reminded me of something that happened years ago. When our children were little, we, every now and then, were in a place where there was a bouncy castle. And one of the things that rather restricted our enjoyment of that was that we were never allowed on the bouncy castle because there was usually someone hanging around supervising it and saying, this lot off, that lot on, nobody over 8 or something, or 14 or whatever it was. So we never got on one. Then a friend of ours held a christening party for her son in the back garden, and there was a giant-sized, unpoliced bouncy castle.
Yes, that's right.
Now, the interesting thing was that the adults got on almost immediately, and the children were standing around the bouncy castle looking with amazement at their mothers and fathers boinging around on the bouncy castle. But there was one man there who was not going to get on that bouncy castle. He was the sort of man who was born in a suit.
Yes.
He wore it like a coffin. And he was standing very, very seriously in his suit, having a drink. And I noticed I watched him very closely, and I saw that every now and then his eyes flickered round and he looked at the Bouncy Castle. And something said to me, that man wants to be on the Bouncy Castle. So as the evening went on, possibly he had another drink, I'm not sure. But as the evening went on, he moved casually towards the Bouncy Castle and eventually sat on the front of it as though he'd arrived there without realising he'd got there at all. And he took off his very smart jacket, folded it carefully, put it down, and then he took off his shiny black shoes, and then he put them side by side like a pair of soldiers amid the jumble of the children's shoes. And like Mummy says you must, always take your undo your laces. He did that. And then he climbed up onto the Bouncy Castle. I'm watching all this, and he sat on it at the side as though he was supervising or something. And then when he thought nobody was watching, he went bananas.
He did. He really did.
Kind of vertical and stiff bananas to start with, but eventually he really flew around. He really enjoyed that Bouncy Castle.
He flung himself, didn't he, backwards and forwards.
He did, and I remember on that day looking at the children's shoes and this man's pair of black shoes in the middle of them, and remembering about Moses and the burning bush, and thinking, this man has taken off his shoes to tread on the hallowed ground of childlikeness.
Yeah.
He had decided to be a kid again.
Yeah.
And I thought it's always been a bit difficult to know what Jesus meant when he talked about we have to become like little children. We sometimes wonder whether he'd actually met many little children, but obviously the very good things about children, and maybe there was a clue there.
Oh, I'm sure there was. I mean, we only have to think about aspects of children to realise that there are some things about them that just so easy to lose when we get older. And a child's eye view of the world is very much like the child who in The Emperor's New Clothes, you know, the one who, if you remember the story,
my hero,
the emperor wanted some new clothes, and there were two disreputable tailors who didn't want to spend any money on material and took all the money he gave them and didn't make him any clothes, but convinced him that he had a wonderful suit of clothes. All his courtiers and then all the crowds were all told he had wonderful clothes, amazing. So they thought it must be them who couldn't see the beautiful new clothes. And so this emperor walks down the road with nothing on at all, thinking he was absolutely looking magnificent. The crowd looking at him thought, well, all I can see is someone with nothing on, but I've been told, so it must be me, until a child says he's got nothing on.
Yeah.
It's an honesty that we can lose so easily when we get adult. And I think that's something we'll explore again later on. But one thing that struck me is a child's eye view on what is happening. We heard from a couple of friends, didn't we, in Australia and somebody in New Zealand saying how strange Anzac Day was this year.
Yes, that was interesting, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and the idea, the idea of children standing in their doorways thinking, well, what is this? Why is it so different? And maybe adults not quite being able to explain because they don't want to trouble the child, but at the same time, a child sensing really strange things, really difficult things.
I think at times, adults are not very good at facing up to truths with children. And you saying that, I mean, we have met at least 2 or 3 people in our dealings with churches and people in churches who, one, there was a man who lost his father very early in his life when he was 7 or 8 or something. And we met him when he was in his early 20s. And he actually broke down one day and wept. Do you remember?
I think I do. Yeah.
And the reason was that he's lost his father. And of course, we said, well, how long ago did it happen? Oh, he said, when I was 7, which was a long time ago.
We thought it must be quite recent, didn't we?
Yeah. So I said, well, tell us why it's still so painful.
Mm.
He said, because when I was 7, nobody let me be hurt. He said, I was in a church where people said, it's all right, he's gone to heaven, God is looking after him, and you don't have to worry about anything. And I was in churches like that every year since then, in fact, till now. And I'm still waiting to be angry and upset. And he really was angry and upset that day. But clearly, he wanted to say to God, look, you're supposed to love me.
Absolutely.
What have you done with my father? I want him back. I want him back.
Yeah.
And that hurt is real. And
Yeah.
you can't have a few capsules of words to dispose of that. And I think sometimes we need to be far more thoughtful and understanding about, certainly about loss, which is very difficult.
Are you saying it's giving children permission to really have it out with God?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, one of our sons used to come and sit on my lap when he was angry with me and hit my fist with his little, my chest with his little fists, and then he'd say, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, and then he'd burst into tears, and then he'd fall asleep. Now that's a pattern I think is not a bad one for people with God, and for the child in us with God.
It takes courage, doesn't it, though? It takes courage and a fear that you might be spoiling things for your child as they face something that is really hard.
Yeah. Oh, I think people do. It's not malice. It's just occasionally it is the thing about the emperor's new clothes that it's kind of spoiling the game.
Yeah.
There's no way to deal with it, to dispose of it. But yeah, it's not easy.
One thing I've been thinking, I've thought quite often really, is that when Jesus says he wants you to be childlike, I don't think he's quite meaning be childish.
No, I don't think he is.
Any of us who have had children will know that there are periods when they're very small, especially the sort of terrible twos period where you're supposed to affirm your child, but actually the only time you can really think of anything positive is when they're lying in bed looking absolutely adorable and you love them so much.
Yes.
I think God must feel like that about us sometimes, just thinking, I really, really, really want to affirm them. We knew of, but I can't quite at the moment because they are shouting and stamping and wanting things. And we knew of a church, didn't we, in Eastbourne, where the whole church was behaving like toddlers because they hadn't got the Toronto blessing, whereas another church
correct.
had. Do you remember?
Yes. They wanted a nice sweetie, a Toronto blessing, and they wanted to send someone to Toronto to get it. Now, the problem with that is that it was known for people to go to Toronto and come back with some new thing, but the people who went usually were people who would have probably got it anyway.
Yes.
I don't know. It's easy to
No, but I do remember
that.
in that case, it was like stamping your foot and saying, I want it and I want it now.
Yeah.
But the wonderful thing about children, of course, is that they don't edit. We were talking about the Psalms and we were talking about David writing his Psalms and how David would take everything that he felt and thought to God. And children do that in their prayers. This is actually probably our favourite ever prayer. It's Sissy's prayer. God, I want to pray that my favourite lamb Binky from our farm will go to heaven and die with us all and be with us all after we die. Well, I think he will be with us because I have eaten him. So he is inside me like Jesus. Some bits of him are inside assorted other members of our family, but please will you put him back together when you get all the bits in? I know it will be a bit of a jigsaw puzzle, but I know you can do it. But don't bother with the one called Frank, because he always buttered me with his head. Amen.
Yeah, I love that. I love it. We will be able to bounce in heaven, I think. People say, what do you want in heaven? One of the things that I know a lot of people would like is to play. Some people we've known have never really learned to play. They'd love to feel that springing inside them.
Yeah.
We've read this last poem we're going to do here so many times. I could not count them. It's about that. It's about getting to heaven and finding that you can play, and it's called Playground. O God, I'm not anxious to snuff it, but when the grim reaper reaps me,
And me, we'll try to rely on our vision of Zion. We know how we'd like it to be.
as soon as you greet us in heaven and ask what we like, we shall say,
We just want a chance for our spirits to dance. We want to be able to play. So tell the angels to build a soft playground designed and equipped just for me.
and me, with a vertical slide that's abnormally wide and oceans of green PVC.
There'll be reinforced netting to climb on and a rubberized floor that will bend.
And no one can die, so we needn't be shy if we're tempted to land on a friend. We'll go mad in the soft, squashy mangle and balmy with balls in the swamp.
Coloured and spherical, we'll be hysterical. We'll have a heavenly romp.
There'll be cushions and punch bags and tyres in purple and yellow and red.
And a mushroomy thing that will suddenly sing if you kick it and land on its head. And there'll be fountains of squash and ribena to feed our continual thirst.
And none of that stuff about you've had enough. Surely heavenly bladders won't burst.
'Cause we might be too tall for the entrance.
But Lord, chuck the rules in the bin.
If we are too large, tell the angel in charge
To let us bow down and come in. And you keep that image in your head for as long as you can, bouncing in heaven. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.